The University of North Alabama has been educating students in the music and entertainment industry since 1975. One of the first programs of its kind in the country, and the first in the state of Alabama. We've got a lot to be proud of as we celebrate the program's 50th anniversary. We want to share some of the alumni and their UNA story.
My time at the University of North Alabama not only educated me about the business, but it was sort of my entree into it. Hi, I'm Walt Aldridge, and this is my UNA story. Man, when I was in school, prior to the University of North Alabama, and I was studying manpower and industrial relations, it was just murder. I would do anything to avoid cracking a book or studying or going to class. But the moment that I got here where I wanted to be, I couldn't get enough of it. I was a sponge. I was so just enthusiastic and enamored with the whole process. And it was just so nice to know, finally, have that feeling of comfort of knowing you're where you belong. When I enrolled, it was in '77, which was the year that was the first graduating class for this program. I think it's really hard in retrospect for people to understand what it was like in those days. You couldn't go into a recording studio unless you were renting it, more or less, unless you worked there. When we had recording techniques, we just sort of had pictures and so forth. I remember we'd go on field trips and go over to Wishbone Studio, which Terry was co-owner in, and he'd say, okay, this is a recording console. Don't touch it, but that's what it looks like. Of course, these days, the university has a state-of-the-art studio that the students can work in. It's a working recording studio, and so it's exactly like being out in the workforce, what you'll run into. One of the great things about an education, I think, is relationships that you build. Now, the very first song that I ever had published, there were two other students here in the program, Carl Jones and Mitch Emmons, and we would write songs, and Mitch was doing his internship with Kevin Lamb, a graduate of the program here, who worked for Terry Woodford, one of the instructors of the program here. And he would say, if we write something good and we'll record it here on our little home system, I'll take it over there and play it for Kevin. And if Kevin thinks it's any good, he can play it for Terry. And so he did that, and we got our first song published. And lo and behold, it got recorded. You hear the old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know, and I don't think that's true. But I do think relationships are very, very important. And so often in life, I've gotten opportunities that I know have come from my relationships that I built as far back as the university. Almost 10 years after graduation, I was contacted by Dr. James Simpson, who was the band director. He asked me if I would be interested in doing some adjunct teaching. I don't know that I had the time to do it, but I was just, I guess arrogant enough to think that I could do it. And I said yes. And because I did want to return something to the school that I felt like had been so instrumental in my getting a job. When I initially started, there was a large number of people that were basically ignorant of how the music business worked. You sort of walk into a recording studio and say, okay, where do the records come out? And they just didn't really understand how the whole process works. But now students come into the program already having a lot of knowledge because they've been able to access it on the web. They've been able to find reading matter about it. Extensive publications, whether they be books or magazines about it. And so they come into it not nearly as green as they did at that point. At that point, I think a big part of the education was taking students who really didn't have any understanding at all about the business and explaining, okay, this is what a number chart looks like for a musician. This is the year that the copyright terms changed. This is what a copyright form looks like. This is what a marketing department in a record company does. this is what the promotion department does, and so forth. So, the bar is definitely higher, and I think it demands more out of the instructors these days than it did in those days to be able to stay ahead of the curve. There were always some bright spots. One of those bright spots I remember that I taught was Jana Malone, who now has had almost 30 years of experience at University of North Alabama, and prior to that, years of experience as Rick Hall's assistant at Fame, which is part of how the family all came together. Dr. Garfrerick was one of our songwriters there at Fame. So I knew him through that, and all three of us had worked at Fame, and so that sort of came together. I think the thing that sets the University of North Alabama's program apart from others is, well, number one is the size, and it's the approach for diversification. There are places you can go that if you want to be a recording engineer, you go there and, maybe you enroll for an 8-week workshop of some kind, and you get in-depth study of engineering. But when you come out, you don't know anything about any other aspect of the business. And I just firmly believe that you don't know what the universe has in mind for you. Nobody does. And so you just kind of have to prepare yourself. That's the whole idea of education. The same is true of the program at the University of North Alabama, is that they sort of encourage you to get this overall understanding of the business. And then you figure out if you can get into the business where it might be. The program has always encouraged that kind of diversification and that thought process. I've had a pretty extensive journey at the University of North Alabama and feel a very warm place for it. And it's played a special part in my life and my success in the music industry.